So one thing that's not uncommon is for developers to make their combat systems unique, just make them stand out, have their own little thing going on for them. And another thing that many people don't necessarily talk about is within every combat mechanic, there are different skill ceilings that are actually in them. I've been covering a lot of these so-called critiques of Gotham Knights combat, and specifically the combat, because I understand and I know that that is a set of objective parameters within the game. Like if you push the button a certain way, or if you do a specific set of moves that apply to a specific set of enemy behaviors that are predictable, you're going to get mostly predictable results. Other things that people have talked about, like traversal and maybe the story, I don't bother arguing because those things are subjective in a sense. The one thing that we know is more than likely objective in terms of measuring is a combat system that is, in my opinion, already pre-programmed and everybody can experience in a similar way. I've also noticed that a lot of people who've been criticizing Gotham Knights combat, in my opinion, have been playing it very wrong. In fact, what was even interesting was I watched a reviewer just recently basically talk about the game and said while they were playing the game, they did not get a hang of the combat until about 15 hours into the particular, game itself. And I was shocked. I was like, wow, it took that long. Imagine how many other people who'd been playing the game could not get basically what the combat really meant in terms of having it be impactful for them, and they gave up on the game. Now, for the most part, I'm not here to just pretty much throw everybody out there and say, it's a skill issue, get good. No. That is reserved for the reviewers. If the reviewers are complaining about the combat and they did not play the combat the right way, I say they need to get good. But we're talking about the general audience, the general public. Now, here's one thing about combat that's really interesting. It's not really uncommon, number one, for people to want simple combat systems. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I have people here in the comment section that have pretty much said to me, hey man, I would really love for combat system in Gotham Knights in the story mode to be very simple. If you look at, say, some comments that I've received here, somebody even told me the other day on my channel and said, man, while I like the combat, but I would prefer that it had been a little simple during the story mode. And if I really want to play games that require me to do a lot more, I can play games like Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter. I understand. But one thing a lot of people don't really talk about is when you think about the people who make these video games, many of them are actually seasoned in combat development, and some of them even take it to a whole different level. We'll take a segue and talk about a developer who's actually an experienced combat games designer and also somebody who's really skilled at playing fighting games. This is Jason DeHarris. Those of you who know or may not know who this was the combat designer for Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, the lead combat designer, and is now the design director for Jedi Survivor. So this game is going to require for you to have a high skill ceiling to enjoy specific aspects of the combat. But one thing that you also notice is he designs his game, or he and his team, they design their game to have accessibility for the general audience. If you go ahead and look at Jason DeHarris and look at basically some of his, gaming and some of the things that he's been a part of, you'll realize that this is somebody who used to compete in EVO from back in the day. Look at this. He's got fighting game championships, fourth place here, Street Fighter Championship, B4, B5 US Street Fighter Championship, 13th place. That's basically top 20. That's not a small feat. Midwest Championship, 2000s, third place. 2002 Midwest Championship, second place. 03's USA team member, and an EVO 2K2 third place, and EVO 2008 top 10. So this is somebody who knows how combat works from the fundies. That's what we call it in the fighting games community. Basically knowing fundamentals of combat and so on and so forth. Here's the thing. Because Gotham Knights is one of those games that requires you to use these fundamentals when you're implementing them in combat because of the different enemy types, your momentum abilities, knowing frames, knowing startup and warm-up frames, and all of those things, a lot of people cannot seem to understand why they have to do anything more than push a few buttons like they did in the Arkham games. This is where the sad reality is. You see, I've actually argued over and over and over and over with a lot of people, even here in the comment section, and I've told them, give me the technical reasons. Tell me why Gotham Knights combat is actually bad from a technical perspective, and all they can tell me is, oh, well, it doesn't have A or B or C, and things that are categorical to some of these games that many of them have played in the past that really do, in a sense, implement systems that holds the player's hands all through the combat. And, honestly, there's nothing bad in having games like these. the developers of Arkham pretty much said that their combat system was a hard combat system to, develop, but it was one that was actually very friendly to communities and the audiences. And since then, Arkham really did shake the industry. A lot of people seem to want to follow that pattern and follow that kind of development to be able to make their games. Maybe they wanted to make them a little bit more intuitive. Maybe they wanted to kind of achieve something where the player could just easily get into the combat. And so you got to see other games come out like Middle-earth, Shadow of Mordor, Shadow of War, and so on and so forth. And, these games really did resonate with a lot of people. There's nothing wrong with that. But when Gotham Knights came on the scene, it appeared that there was some kind of an adverse reaction to people not having their hands held and needing to maybe study and understand the combat, and them not having any cushion much in regard to maybe playing and, engaging the combat in a simplistic way. I think this might be my criticism for Gotham Knights, probably not layering the combat in a way where there are beginner-friendly elements that are satisfying, and then allowing for a higher level of satisfaction for the internal in-depth side for those who really do vibe with the combat. What I mean by that is something that Jason DeHarris actually mentioned a while ago when he was talking about the Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order game. A lot of people at that time on the internet were making jokes and saying, anybody who may be playing this game, on easy difficulty is a noob and all that. And he came out and said, don't let anybody tell you that you're, that you're not good at what you're doing in terms of playing the game how you want to play it. And by the way, this is his blog with combat mechanics in different video games, him explaining it. And he said, play the game however you feel you want to play it. But the way they designed the games and the systems in Jedi Fallen Order, you can basically run around with your lightsaber and slash everybody. But if you learn things like timed blocks or parries, you'll be able to unlock different aspects of the game where you can pretty much take out an enemy NPC in a few hits rather than having to fight them over and over and then dodge and then suffer. The game rewards you for getting into combat mechanics. Gotham Knights is a game that actually does that. And even if that criticism is there also has to be the side where developers, in my opinion, must be allowed to make their games actually require whatever skill ceiling that they want the game to require. Like, even though I may say I criticize the developers for this, it's still a light level of say, okay, maybe this is one thing that they could have done. But then in other video games, we've also allowed for other developers to get away with pretty much increasing the skill ceiling as high as they want. Examples of games like that will be Dark Souls. We see from Software's developers, they did not necessarily care about your feelings or about the fact that, I can't necessarily just go ahead and, mash, this button and that button and get my, my thrill and my satisfaction, because I used to play this one game that I love so much where all the enemy NPCs just pretty much let me get free reign and stood around. But instead, the enemy NPCs were much harder. They hit harder and you had to really get good. And over time, their combat system came to be appreciated. And it wasn't necessarily a matter of, we're not necessarily, going to engage this combat system because we don't think it's good. It's now we're going to respect this combat system because it requires for you to actually have a level of, skill that actually is implemented in this one game. I think this is where Gotham Knights basically started from. It went ahead and set its threshold super high. Like, hey, sure, you can do some simple things like, basic hits and so on and so forth. But if you actually get used to the timed, strike system, then the reward starts to build up. If you then mix the time strike system with the perfect dodge system, you get more of that reward in terms of how the combat layers and rewards you. If you then mix up that time strike with the perfect dodge system, with good implementation of your momentum abilities, then you eventually get the final layer where things are super unlocked and you just feel like you're invincible in the game. And I think this is the one thing that a lot of people missed out on. They did not necessarily pay attention to the way these actually are layered. Instead, what they decided was, if the game doesn't give me the immediate satisfaction like out of the box, then I deem the combat bad. I mean, if you really want to go ahead and see what I'm talking about, I have 2 videos that I've actually set up just critiquing or at least analyzing the so-called critique of somebody who made a video talking about how combat in Gotham Knights was mid, whereas they ignored the systems and how to actually, in a sense, take care of enemy NPCs and opposition that they were getting in the game. This person did such a poor job in playing the game. I'm shocked. And they have almost 500,000 views on this particular video. So they made a video talking about how the combat was bad, but did not use simple elements that the developers not only left in the game, but wrote down in some cases. Like they literally wrote it down and said, hey, if you're having, for you to be able to do this, you got to do this. And the reviewer basically ignored this. And they showed it in their video, which is amazing to me that this is something that people have allowed to basically influence their opinions of Gotham Knights. And another thing, too, that I really want to go ahead is those who are saying that Gotham Knights combat is slow, I hope you do know that there's a variable speed within the combat as you eventually start to implement some of the systems like the time systems. It actually does speed up the pace of your combat if you're actually dealing damage the way that is the most optimal in the game. So the game rewards how well you're playing the game skillfully rather than mashing with a little bit of speed. Did you know that? Maybe you didn't. So maybe if you have the game and you put it down because you said something about the combat, you might want to go back and read the fine print because it's all in there. And I'm telling you, if you just take your time, have a little bit of patience, don't get into that instant gratification mindset, there might be something that surprises you in this game if you would just take the time to examine it with a cool head and a level-minded approach. So thanks so much for watching the video. Let me hear your thoughts in the comment section, and hopefully we can talk in another video. Peace out.